The Slovaks are going to the polls to elect their parliament, or as they call it, National Council. So how does the Slovak voting system work? And what are they voting for exactly when electing members of the council? In the next few minutes we'll give you a quick tour of Slovak democracy. Welcome to Ciceroni. Now, before we go into how Slovaks vote and what for, let's take a moment to look back at what was necessary for them to get the vote. The first time Slovaks voted for the National Council as it is now was in 1994, and it was rather a long and winding road to get there. So let's look back. During the time that Slovakia was a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, not a lot of people could vote. So apart from for a small elite, there was no voting or democratic process to speak of. This changed after World War I, when an independent Czechoslovakia was formed and every citizen was given the vote. During the First Republic, Czechoslovakians had two assemblies, a Senate and a Chamber of Deputies. The country was a lot bigger than the Czechoslovakia of later generations. Under pressure and propaganda from Nazi Germany, growing discontent among ethnic minorities like the Hungarians, the Poles and the Germans led to uprisings and ultimately to parts of the country separating from Czechoslovakia. Interestingly enough, it was France, the UK, Italy and Germany who decided on the separation, not Czechoslovakia itself. Eventually Slovakia, supported by Nazi Germany, declared full independence, which in turn was not recognized by the Allies. As the Nazis weren't too keen on democracy, Slovak citizens had very little to vote for and no elections were held in the German protectorate. While officially political power was still divided between the government, the president, the National Assembly and the State Council, in reality the government and the president created and passed all laws. By the end, the assembly was just a formality, and all recommendations passed by the State Council were non-binding. Moreover, any changes made by the government were on recommendation from Nazi Germany. After the war, a third Czechoslovakian republic was founded, but this attempt ended only after a few years, when in 1948 the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia seized full power in a coup d'etat and monopolized political power for the next 40 years. Technically, everyone did have a chance to vote. In fact, the regime was so fond of democracy, they even brought the ballot box to your door if you didn't show up to vote. The only problem was that there was really no choice to be made. All political parties were grouped under one umbrella organization called the National Front, which was led by the Communist Party. On election day, there was only a single ballot, and by voting, citizens simply agreed to the pre-selected candidates. This worked very well for the regime, as it could claim that almost the entire population showed up and supported the communist government. It took another 40 years and the Velvet Revolution for democracy to return. In 1990, Czechoslovakia became a federal state, with two national governments and two councils. However, after only a few years, internal struggles led the country to split in two, each new country with one government and one council. Remarkably, and definitely worth a compliment to the Czechs and the Slovaks, all of this happened without any bloodshed. Now, back to the present day and why it is so important to vote for the National Council. Slovaks do also elect their president, but while the president is the head of state, it is mostly a ceremonial position with limited powers. For example, the president appoints the prime minister, but as only the leader of the largest party can become prime minister, really the people decide who should be appointed. The president can also veto any proposal of the National Council, but if the president does cast a veto on any decision, it will only delay and not stop a new law, as the council can push it through later anyway. So the real power lies not with the president, but with the National Council. The Národná rada, or National Council, consists of 150 members and is led by the Speaker, who doesn't hold a lot of big powers or responsibilities, but is basically the chair of the meeting. Still, the Speaker is an important ceremonial position, and in case there is no elected president, the Speaker can even take over some presidential tasks. All 150 members are elected by proportional representation in a single nationwide constituency, which means that if a party gets 10% of the votes in the country, it also gets 10% of the seats in the National Council. A party must always have more than 5% though. If a party receives less, it gets no seats at all. Apart from this 5% electoral threshold, there are some other restrictions for parties who want to run in elections. For example, a maximum of 3 million euros can be spent on political campaigns. And no, you didn't mishear that. While in some other countries candidates and parties spend fortunes to convince the voter, in Slovakia they have a limit of 3 million. As a crazy contrast, Obama spent around 730 million on his campaign. Of course, he also has a lot more people to convince, but it is still more than 4 times as much per person. Like in most European countries, all citizens who have the nationality and are 18 years and older are allowed but not required to vote. All these citizens can just walk into the voting station as long as they vote in their own municipality and have an ID. No pre-registration is needed. Unlike a lot of other countries though, there is a higher age for running as candidate, which is 21. Voters cast their vote to one party or one coalition, but also have the option to cast preferential votes for a maximum of 4 candidates. If a candidate receives more than 5% preferential votes, they can overtake candidates who were higher on the list. Following the election, the president nominates a new prime minister, usually the leader of the party that has won most votes. In order for a party to form a government, they need a majority, for which they usually need to form a coalition with other parties. When the majority coalition come to an agreement, the prime minister recommends cabinet ministers to the president, who has to appoint them all to form a new government. The government executes and implements laws. So, if the government executes and implements laws, what does the National Council do? It has to approve new laws, changes to existing laws, and changes to the constitution. Apart from making laws, the council needs to approve the yearly budget before the government can spend any money. Beside that, it also has a big say in important decisions like military operations, international treaties, and referendums. Put simply, all new laws that someone wants to pass, every change to the constitution, every time the military gets up to anything, and every euro that is spent needs to be approved by and checked by the National Council. Slovakia has a unicameral system, which means it only has one chamber. This is unlike countries like the UK and the US, which are bicameral, with a lower and an upper house. This means that the National Council is the only constitutional and legislative body. The lack of a second chamber makes the system more effective than a bicameral system, where chambers can block each other. On the other hand, it forgoes some of the checks and balances that the two-chamber system provides. But that's the subject of another video. So, to recap. Slovakia's head of state is the president. However, that office is largely ceremonial. The real power lies in a national council that creates laws and approves the state budget. The government, led by the prime minister, is the political leadership that executes these laws. In the elections, citizens can vote for the largely ceremonial figure of the president, as well as the members of the national council. They cannot vote on members of the government or the prime minister. As the prime minister is the leader of the most popular party or coalition, the government derives its legitimacy directly from citizens. Simply put, whoever wins the national elections gets to put forth the prime minister, who in turn chooses the rest of the government.
Interested to see how this system compares to other countries? Watch our playlist on democratic systems and subscribe to our channel, or maybe even become our patron to help us make more of these videos in the future.